So Reconstructional poetry. Okay, so we'll start off with our quote from Eli, I'm going to say this wrong, Komorov. Poets are soldiers that liberate words from the steadfast possession of definition. So what he's suggesting there is that poets get to... Okay, thank you, Eva. So what it's saying here is that one of the purposes or jobs of a poet is to use words differently, or to take something that has been done one way and kind of change it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Reconstructional poetry. Reconstructional poetry is poetry that pays homage to other people's work. So it's where you use inspiration from another poem or a story or a movie, a song, and use the ideas and the words from that original and kind of use it as inspiration to write your own. Okay. And this happens a lot, right? I mean, we see it in movies all the time, right? You take a novel or a book series and you turn it into a TV show or a movie, right? But people sometimes will, we're going to look at an example by Alfred Tennyson where he takes Ulysses. So he takes the story of the Odyssey and turns it into a poem, which he calls Ulysses, about Odysseus and his journey home. So he's paying homage to that. He's taking a story and he's kind of doing honor to it, paying respect to it by converting it into a poem. So the poem that we're going to look at, we're going to listen to it, is filled with a lot of imagery, a complex persona, and powerful ideas, all that originally come from an original story, but he's kind of building on that. So let's give a listen.
Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race, that hoard and sleep and feed, and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone, on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. I am become a name. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much I have seen and known. Cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met. Yet all experience is an arch, wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence something more, a bringer of new things. And vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself in this gray spirit, yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. This is my son, my own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. Well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor by slow prudence, to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends. 'Tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset, and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
Okay. So that poem is based on a Greek, I don't think it's a ballad, but like an epic. Yeah, that's probably the better word. About a man named Odysseus. He was, and you probably heard some references to Troy, Achilles, and it is the character of Odysseus, or in some cases, some people call him Ulysses, looking back on his life and his as a king on his island and what he wants for his son. Of course, this poem would make a lot more sense if you had like read the story of the Odyssey, right? But what he's doing in this poem is paying homage to that story and kind of taking it as inspiration and going beyond, right? He's writing more than the story ends when Odysseus comes home, but he's writing as Odysseus looking back on his life and how he wants to die and what he wants for his son. To give you some context, though, because many of us haven't, I mean, some of you might have read that story, but many of you probably haven't. We're going to go through a little quick video that talks to us about Odysseus. I think I talked here already about this. Yeah, it makes more sense. Like you can appreciate the poem and how well it is written and its use of metaphor, its structure, without having read the story. But of course, it makes more sense, and you'll get more out of the poem if you know the Odyssey. So we're just going to watch a little video crash course, if you will, on what the story of the Odyssey is. So that'll help you understand the poem just a bit more.
Hi, I'm John Green. Welcome to Crash Course Literature. You can tell that I'm an English teacher because I'm wearing a sweater, but you can tell that I'm the kind of English teacher who wants to be your friend because I'm wearing awesome sneakers. This is actually season 2 of Crash Course Literature. If you want to watch season 1, you can do so over here. It's season 4 of Crash Course Humanities. It might even be like season 7 or 8 if you count all the science stuff. Whatever, let's just get started. We're going to start at the beginning of literature, or at least a beginning of literature. Sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of a man who lets all his shipmates die, lies to everyone he meets, cheats on his wife with assorted nymphs, and takes 10 years to complete a voyage that, according to Google Maps, should have taken 2 weeks. That man is, of course, one of the great heroes of the ancient world. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Odysseus, star of Homer's The Odyssey. Did I just say the odd at sea? It's a good pun. Not in the original Greek, though. Now, everyone knows that you can't properly enjoy a book until you know a lot about its author, so before we discuss the Odyssey, we're going to begin with a biographical sketch of Homer, the legendary blind poet of ancient Greece. What's that? Apparently, we know nothing about him. Well, in fact, we know that whoever wrote them didn't actually write them because they were composed orally. And was Homer even blind? Well, there are some verses about blindness in the Homeric hymns, and there's a blind bard who appears in the Odyssey. But if authors only wrote about characters who were like themselves, then James Joyce's characters would have all had one eye, and I would be an astonishingly handsome 17-year-old. As for the subject of Homer's poems, archaeological evidence tells us that the Trojan War occurred around the 12th century BCE, although it probably included far fewer gods and similes than in the epics based on it. And again, maybe not. It's not like we have pictures. Anyway, Homer composed the Iliad and the Odyssey in the 8th century BCE, so centuries after the events it describes. And then no one bothered to write them down for another 200 years, which means they probably changed a lot as they were passed down via the oral tradition, and even today there are arguments about which parts are original and which parts are additions. There were a lot of competing poems about the Trojan War, but Homer's were by far the most famous, and they are now the most famous because they were also the only ones to survive the burning of the library at Alexandria. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are epic poems, and we define an epic as a long narrative poem on a serious subject written in a grand or elevated style centered on a larger-than-life hero. By the way, that was an example of dactylic hexameter, just like you see in epic poems. So the events of the Odyssey take place after those of the Iliad, so let's have a brief recap thought bubble. So Helen, the wife of Menelaus, runs off with Paris, a Trojan prince, or maybe she's abducted, it's not clear. Anyway, Menelaus' brother Agamemnon gathers allies and goes to Troy to get her back, but the war drags on for 10 years, at which point everyone is really tired and bored and wants to go home, until things suddenly get pretty tense because Agamemnon seizes a concubine of Achilles, and Achilles gets really angry and says he won't fight anymore, and things go really badly for the Greeks until Patroclus, Achilles' best friend and maybe also lover, it's not clear, goes into battle in his place and does a pretty awesome job until he's slain by Hector, the Trojan's great warrior, which forces Achilles to reconcile himself with his own mortality and return to the field where he becomes the ultimate death-dealing machine, slaying hordes of Trojans, including Hector, whose body he drags behind his chariot, because that's how Achilles rolls, until Hector's father, Priam, comes and begs for his son's corpse, and Achilles relents, and they have dinner together, and then the book ends with the war still going on and nothing really resolved. And that's the Iliad. When the Odyssey opens, it's 10 years later, and everyone is already back home, except for Odysseus. His son Telemachus and his wife Penelope don't know if he's dead or alive, but Homer reveals that he's on the Isle of Ogygia, imprisoned by the nymph Calypso, who's so hot for Odysseus, even though he spends his days laying on the beach and crying, that she won't let him go. But finally, the gods intervene, and after a series of adventures and a whole lot of backstory, he finally returns home to Ithaca in disguise and kills several dozen suitors who have been drinking all of his wine, eating his beeves, annoying his wife, and plotting to kill his son. And it seems like a cycle of violence is just going to continue on probably forever until the goddess Athena, who loves Odysseus, intervenes and restores peace. The end. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So some of the big questions around the Odyssey are Odysseus' heroic characteristics, the epic's double standard for women, and whether you can ever actually stop a cycle of violence. Odysseus hardly appears in the Iliad, and he's not a particularly great fighter. In fact, he's a pretty sleazy guy. He leads a night raid into the enemy camp and kills a bunch of sleeping Trojans. That's not particularly glorious. But it is typical of Odysseus, who will pretty much do whatever it takes to survive. I mean, his distinguishing quality is metis, which means skill or cunning. Odysseus is smart. He's really smart. I mean, he's an incredibly persuasive speaker, and he can talk his way out of the stickiest of situations, even ones that involve, like, cyclopses. But he's also kind of a monster of self-interest, and if he weren't so smug and overconfident, he might have gotten home in less than, you know, like, a gajillion years. The best example of this is probably Odysseus's encounter with the Cyclops. So Odysseus and his men land on the island of the Cyclops, and he and several of his guys settle into the Cyclops' cave, feasting on the delicious goat cheese that the Cyclops has hoarded, and then expecting the Cyclops to return and offer them gifts, because that's what you do when someone breaks into your house. I mean, yes, there was an ancient Greek tradition of hospitality, but that's taking it pretty far, and for the record, it's also pretty much exactly what the suitors are doing in Odysseus' house, for which he kills them. So the Cyclops comes home, and he's so thoroughly not psyched about these guys in his cave that he begins to eat them, and in response, Odysseus gets the Cyclops drunk and then blinds him with a flaming spear, which is fairly easy to do because, of course, he only has one eye. Odysseus has given his name as No Man, so when the Cyclops calls out, "No man is hurting me! No man is killing me!" the other Cyclopses don't come to his aid. Because, you know, they think there's no man hurting him. It's a pun. It's a blindingly good pun. But then, just when it seems that Odysseus might get away with it, he can't tolerate the idea that no man is going to get the credit, so he announces his actual name, causing the Cyclops to call down curses upon him, which culminates in all of his men being killed. Just as a rule of thumb, you do not want to be friends with Odysseus, and you also don't want to be his enemy. Just stay away. So Odysseus is a trickster and a liar and a pirate and a serial adulterer, and he's responsible for the death of a lot of people, and he also has probably the worst sense of direction in all of Greek literature. But is he a hero? Yes. To the Greeks, heroism didn't mean perfection. It meant that you had an extraordinary attribute or ability, and Odysseus definitely does. It's not for nothing that he's the favorite of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. I mean, she applauds all of his tricks and stratagems, and she encourages us to applaud them too, even though from our contemporary perspective, he's a pretty shady dude. Speaking of contemporary perspective, one of Odysseus's least stellar qualities is his attitude toward women. He's really big on this sexual double standard in which the exact same behavior types women as sluts and men as studs. Actually, the whole epic in general is incredible. Wait, why is my desk moving? Oh, the secret compartment is open. It must be time for the open letter. What have we got today? Well, it's Medusa, a representation of woman as a monstrous serpent. An open letter to the patriarchy. How are you so incredibly resilient? Also, please explain something to me. How is it that the only way for someone to become like a good, heroic, strong man is to have sex with lots of women? But if a woman has sex with lots of men, she's like tainted and impure and horrible. Patriarchy, I don't want to get too deeply into math, but in order for men to have sex with a lot of women have to have sex with men. That's it, that's the only way, patriarchy. So basically, you're saying that the only way for men to achieve manliness is for women to fail at womanliness. It's bad, actually, it's evil. I hate you. Best wishes, John Green. Yeah, so the whole epic is incredibly paranoid about female sexuality. I mean, the story that haunts the Odyssey is that of Agamemnon, the leader of the Achaeans, who returns victorious from the war only to be murdered by his wife and her lover. And then, when they meet in the underworld, Agamemnon's ghost warns Odysseus that he'd better come home in secret because Penelope might try and have him killed too. And the misogyny doesn't end there. I mean, this is a book full of monsters, and Cyclops aside, a lot of them are female, like the Sirens, who lure men to their deaths, or Scylla, who's basically an octopus with teeth. And then, of course, there's Charybdis, a hole that sucks men to their doom. You can explore the Freudian implications of that one over at Crash Course Psychology. Meanwhile, Odysseus sleeps with like every manner of magical lady and nearly marries an island princess, but he assures us that he was always true to his wife in his heart. Which is nice, but it would be even nicer if he were true to his wife in his pants. Stan, who is ever the stickler for historical accuracy, would like me to acknowledge that Odysseus didn't wear pants because they weren't a thing in Greece yet, so he wasn't true to his wife in like his toga or his loincloth or whatever. Anyway, even as he's sleeping around, Odysseus is incredibly concerned with whether or not Penelope is chaste. If she isn't, he'll likely kill her. After all, he later executes all the housemaids for sleeping with the suitors, and he's not even married to them. The epic seems like it's building to a climactic scene wherein Odysseus is going to test Penelope's faithfulness, but instead it's Penelope who tests Odysseus. When he reveals himself to her, she doesn't recognize him. She forces him to prove himself by speaking the secret of their marriage bed. And only then does she embrace him in one of the most beautiful lines in all of Homer. And so she too rejoiced, her gaze upon her husband, her white arms round him pressed as though forever. Some ancient commentators believe the poem should end right there, like any good romance would, with Odysseus and Penelope blissfully reunited. But it doesn't. See, Odysseus and a couple of his friends, with a big assist from Athena, have slaughtered all the suitors and the serving maids, and that's a problem because this isn't the Iliad. They aren't at war. The Iliad is a poem of war, and its main concern is kleos, which means glory or renown achieved on the battlefield that guarantees you a kind of immortality because your deeds are so amazing that everyone's going to sing about you forever. Achilles didn't get to go home. He had two choices. He could stay and fight and win glory, or he could go home and live a long and quiet life. In the Iliad, Achilles went for glory. But the Odyssey is about the alternative. It's about what we do after a war, how we put war away. Odysseus isn't particularly good at this. He's sort of an ancient example of post-traumatic stress disorder. He's been through so much that he doesn't know how to adjust to peacetime. His response to young men taking over his dining hall and barbecuing all of his pigs is mass slaughter. And the slaughter of the suitors leads to their relatives coming to try to slaughter Odysseus. And if Athena hadn't descended from Olympus conveniently and put a stop to it, pretty soon there would have been no one left on Ithaca alive. And that's a sobering final thought. If it weren't for divine intervention, the humans in this story might have continued that cycle of violence forever. The Odyssey is a poem set in peacetime, but it reminds us that humans have never been particularly good at leaving war behind them. Next week, we'll be discussing another story with lots of sex and violence and Greeks, Oedipus. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then.
Okay, so that gave you some context and maybe a little bit more than you needed about the Odyssey. But so Odysseus, as we mentioned, maybe you've known about the Trojan War. There was a movie a few years back with Brad Pitt. But Odysseus is the one who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse and used it to get inside Troy and kill everyone. But the poem we just read is him afterwards, him looking back and this desire to travel, right? The fact that he's now been at home in Ithaca with his wife sitting on his throne, everything's peaceful and he's bored and he wants to leave. And he wants to leave the island to his son and go out exploring until he dies. And so the poem that Tennyson wrote makes far more sense now that you know about the story of Odysseus. Okay. I do want to talk a little bit because we see a lot of examples of people taking stories, original stories, and kind of expanding on them. In our culture today, we call that fan fiction, right? So people, well, there's lots of them for Star Wars and for like Hunger Games or any of those big, series that people love and are passionate about. Twilight has fan fiction. Like there's fan fiction for everything, basically. And so people take it upon themselves to expand on other characters, maybe small characters that were shown in the series, or to talk about backstory or what happens after the movies. And so that's another example of people paying homage to what they love. And then we also have to think about the question of plagiarism. So where does using someone else's original thoughts to write your own pieces of work cross the line into plagiarism? Because plagiarism is when you take someone else's ideas and pass them off as your own. So a lot of times people, they know, like, okay, this is not George Lucas who's writing this. Who would have done Star Wars. So this person is writing fan fiction, but is fan fiction plagiarism? Right? Where is that line between plagiarism and paying homage or homage and fan fiction? So what I want you to do is get into your breakout groups, talk about examples, like how examples of fan fiction and what fan fiction is, and do you like it or do you write it yourself? Because I know there's some of you who do. And then where's that line? Where is it okay to write about someone else's work and to use it as inspiration, and when do you start committing plagiarism? Okay, I'll give you 15 minutes in your breakout rooms to talk about this. Looks like most people have filtered back in. So how did that discussion go? What were your thoughts around fan fiction, paying homage, plagiarism? Eva?
So we talked about none of us really thought that it is plagiarism, especially since it is like if it's posted on if it's posted online and it's not, being published as a book, if it's posted online on a website where the author is making no money from it, no profit from somebody else's world, then it is not plagiarism because, they're specifying that it's not completely their own story. We also talked about how it's a good way of sort of expanding or extending sort of how you view a story. Like if there's a you don't like in a series, like we talked about Star Wars, then it's a good opportunity to kind of read, what could have happened if it went well, or if it was something that you enjoyed more than what was put out, or if there was an ending that you wanted to see how somebody else interpreted it, then you could read that and see, what could have happened if the author or the director chose a different ending. And we just talked about how it's like it's really not bad as people say, and it can be a good way to get out your creativity without spending a bunch of time creating your own characters, and it could be good practice as long as you're specifying that it's not completely your own story.
Good points. Any other opinions to share? What? Yeah, S.
I agree with Ava on that. The like not making profit off of it and stuff as well, and that it's a good way to expand the canon. The biggest thing I say is that it's an understanding that it isn't your own, and it's a saying like I'm making fan fiction. Fan fiction is known as it's a taking from fiction, whereas if you're like, this is my fiction story that I just wrote, and then it's a bunch of characters that everyone already knows, that's plagiarism. So yeah.
So Dasha is writing that it's obvious that the author is expanding on someone else's work, not claiming it as their own. It's true. Now, what if people started making money off of their fan fiction? Would that become a problem? I mean, generally people don't, but yeah, Alex is saying yeah. And of course, if they're not saying where they got it, usually these are on websites where people know, right? But okay, good talk. We're going to have a little bit of fun now. Hopefully it's fun. We're going to create what are called like book title poems or book spine poems. I'm just going to show you some examples real quick. So this is where people take the spine of books and the titles of those books and create a poem out of the name. So in this case, I live in the future, and here's how it works. People waste and want everything in the pursuit of the unknown. Pretty deep. Other ones, my fun with words, the charm of words, using words, only words in their own words, wordplay. In other words, I love sleeping with the dictionary. So, and there's lots of examples. You can just search for images and find that there's lots of different book spine poems or book title poems, however what you want to call them. What we're going to do is take, let's say 20, let's go with 30 minutes. I was going to give you 30 minutes for you to create your own book title poem. So take until 10:10, go around your house, find some books, and make a poem. You're going to share what you've created in your breakout groups. But I'm giving you 30 minutes so that you can make this poem and also give yourself a bit of a break. Okay? So 30 minutes, make a poem with some of the books around your house. And they don't have to be like, I mean, you've got graphic novels, magazines, whatever you've got around your house, it's got a spine and a title on it to create a poem. Okay. Any questions? Can we leave? Yeah. And then come back? Yeah, absolutely, Eva. Come back for 10:10. Okay. not 10, 10, 10. Oh, yeah, let's just do 10, 10, 10, 10. I'll put a thing up on the screen.